Just a brief introduction. I live and work in Dallas, Texas. I got my bachelor's degree in geography at the University of Chicago. For those who know what this means, that was pre-Luke Anselin, which kind of sucks. And yeah, I'll go ahead and get into it. There's not anything on this GitHub page right now, but I plan to eventually upload the scripts and kind of the database outline from this project there in the next few weeks, months, whenever I can get around to it. So the scope of this talk is going to be looking at historic real estate development strategies and the kind of associated cartographic techniques that emerge alongside them. Then I'm going to get into some specifics of a database that is useful for kind of exploring what has happened in a given area after property or urban redevelopment, and then kind of explore a few different cartographic techniques that we can use to sort of re-narrate what has happened in an area, and if we make it to the end, some questions, hopefully. So I'm going to start by reframing what produces property data. So the main data source I'm going to use kind of throughout this presentation is parcel data. So in Texas, that would be produced by county appraisal districts. But I wanted to get a little bit into what that data actually looks like by focusing on what real estate development is. So the kind of frame that I use for this research is that housing and commercial real estate and the things that we know of, like houses, buildings, are not the main purpose of real estate development. They're actually a byproduct. The main purpose of real estate development is, of course, return on capital. And so a real estate project will only really be created if there is a way that the initial capital spent on it will return more. This is a pretty basic economic theory. I think we're all pretty familiar with it. However, it's important to note that there are measures that can be taken in situations where these circumstances aren't really possible to make them more possible. So usually that is framed as kind of public intervention, but there are other sort of means that developers sometimes use or that state or public agencies use. So the two main techniques that I think are really important that are used in urban redevelopment are enclosure and erasure. So these are kind of well-researched development techniques. Enclosure would be kind of encircling land and binding people to labor on it. That could either be directly through literally forcing people to work on land, or indirectly through like rent systems or like sharecropping systems. And then erasure is kind of erasing an existing use and replacing it with an imagined future use. And that's realized through kind of destruction of the prior use and replacement with the new use. So let's jump straight into Dallas. So all my examples will be from Dallas. I want to kind of caveat and say if these things don't make sense because of where you're from, that's totally fine. When I hear talks that are like universalized and I'm like, that's not how it is in Dallas, I get kind of annoyed. So we're going to start kind of going back to the original surveys for the city of Dallas. So these were done by W.A. Ferris in 1840. This is not the map of the original survey. This is a recreation from a Journal of North Texas History. Also, it's oriented kind of strangely, but north is like to the upper right for some reason. I think so the Trinity River goes north-south. Regardless, these are the original plots of land that were kind of parsed out by the original survey to the early settlers in Dallas. This would be in the early 1840s. But W.A. Ferris and the original kind of regime that settled the city of Dallas and where that is now had a very kind of peculiar history. So W.A. Ferris was a surveyor who, alongside his property surveys, surveyors are not allowed to speculate, so a surveyor would work with other kind of state agencies. And so he worked with General James Smith, who was a general who led an expedition that was essentially an act of genocide against a group of Caddo and Tonkawa Indians living at Village Creek, which is now in Arlington, Texas. And so that happened alongside the creation of these kind of parcel maps and the kind of breaking up of Dallas County into its separate original plots. So this property system that he set up, obviously we've all seen parcel maps. This was the only place that this happened, but this system of land, the system of parcels from the land was very, very successful. And this is obviously, in my opinion, a bad thing. After the Civil War, about 20 or 30 years later, cotton production exploded in Texas from 350,000 bales a year to 3.5 million bales a year. It's about a third of the United States total. So this was a huge, huge boon for that industry, which is obviously a very destructive industry, both on the people working in it and on the land itself. And by 1900, Dallas, which was still a relatively small city at the time, was the largest inland cotton port in the world. So the original act of kind of clearing the indigenous people from the land and kind of creating these large parcels, which obviously were plantations at the time, created the opportunity for all of this value to be created. And so what kind of became of that site today? This is the Village Creek site today. It's been flooded and kind of looks like your typical suburban development. So this is maybe not an unfamiliar story to everyone, but the sort of research that I'm interested in is how have these techniques that started hundreds of years ago persevered into our current day, and how can we sort of discover them? So it's important to note that these destructive actions kind of precede the creation of all of that value. So you can't have all of that trade and all of that industrial agriculture without these prior acts of removal and erasure. And so let's start. I'm only going to focus on one development strategy, but the database that I'm going to use to kind of go through this could be used to explore a lot of different strategies. So we're going to start with public-private partnerships. So public-private partnerships are where the private sector and real estate developers pair up with the public sector to accomplish some sort of project. So a really common example are Rails to Trails initiatives, where the government will remediate a site and then a developer will develop near it. I think suburban greenfield development is somewhat similar in that the city will fund sewers and roads, and then developers will build new housing. And there's a really great advantage to working with the state because they have the tools to facilitate these kind of value creation processes. You don't have to pay taxes, and they have a standing police force or military to accomplish whatever goals they would like to accomplish. So I'm going to focus on one particular area in Dallas called the Great Trinity Forest. Currently, there's a push to transform this area of kind of flooded forest land in the southeast area of the city. So you can see it on this map as just that dark green swath kind of down where near it says William Blair Park. The idea is that they want to create a sort of urban park oasis. It's often marketed as the largest hardwood forest in the US. I really don't remember the exact marketing, but it's being kind of proposed as this unique asset in the city of Dallas. So this is a little more detail of the area. And then I want to note this area here, and we're going to come back to this in a second. This is some of the maps that are used in this sort of push towards a public-private partnership towards developing park infrastructure in this area and real estate development alongside of it. There's a few things I want to point out from these cartographic representations. This is from a map that is actually much taller than this, but I couldn't get it on the slide, obviously. But down here at the bottom of the map, where you see this sort of fade to white, and then the kind of state institutions and the corporate partners, Encore, which is our local electric provider, TxDOT, DART, our public transit agency, are kind of standing in this sort of unmarked, like off the map grassy area. This is another map for the loop trail, which would be the bike trail that would run through this whole area. As you can see, it encircles the Great Trinity Forest to the south, but it also kind of unites it with the area north of Interstate 30. So the city of Dallas is very segregated. The northern half of Interstate 30 is wealthier and whiter. The bottom half is generally poorer. So the final thing is the city of Dallas map. This is for an ongoing project. It's a $1 billion investment in drainage infrastructure that's supposed to remediate flooding in the southeast area of downtown Dallas and open that area up for redevelopment. So this map, again, if you look at the southeast corner, there's just a sort of quiet fade out, and it's not really clear what is at the end of this receiving kind of portal of floodwater. So this is how the map was originally presented, with the kind of before and after. So you can really get a sense of how the city's cartographers are imagining that this flood infrastructure will remove the kind of blight of water from this area by displacing it to somewhere. So that's kind of what unifies these visualizations. Something is happening just off the map that we don't really need to focus on. We just need to focus on the promise of what's to come, which is this great new asset, this new park infrastructure, and uniting this new park infrastructure with the existing kind of stores of wealth in the city. So let's kind of explore that a little bit. So I mentioned this area. We're going to focus back in on this area. So this is actually a neighborhood called Roosevelt Heights. This is what it looks like today. It looks like a pretty forested, flooded out area. I have in this little map, and that little yellow dot is one parcel highlighted. Roosevelt Heights So Roosevelt Heights was not always a flooded out forested area. Up until the 1980s, it was cleared, there was arable land near it, and it was a community of, at one point, 1,000 people. Unfortunately, it was in the White Rock Creek drainage area. So using the parcel database that I developed, I was able to query this location and using historic parcel geometries, generate expanding buffer rings from that location to reveal what used to be in this area. So as I click through, we're going to go through increasingly large buffers, and you'll see as we go, the sort of outline and parcel shapes of what used to be a neighborhood sort of reveal themselves. So this is just that comparison again. The forested area previously was a neighborhood platted out, and lots of people lived there. This is what it looked like in 1945. As you can see, not very forested, cleared land. This is the same area in the 1970s. Again, the forest was nearby, but not fully encroaching like it is today. And so this is the 1980s. So in that decade, the city of Dallas made a decision to essentially turn this land into a floodway for White Rock Creek. White Rock Creek has a watershed that expands all the way into the north suburbs of Dallas, which were rapidly expanding at the time. And so by kind of devoting this area to receive all of that floodwater, it created the opportunity for development in the northern part of the city. So what I wanted to explore is, what are the existing connections to this area, and how do we get these names back on the map? If the city and the kind of private developers are working together to slowly erase this out of existence and slowly cover up what used to be here, how can we sort of bring that back? So what I can do with this database is connect demolition permits, 311 calls, all sorts of geospatial kind of debris from city and county operations to a given area. So if we were to take that parcel and do a spatial query around it for any demolition, construction, building permits that were issued going back 20 years to 1999, we're able to see that there have been some issued here. And so when we pull those permits, you can see that in the year 2010, in this flooded out area that's been condemned and kind of promoted as a kind of catchment area for all of this floodwater, there's still someone residing in a house who was issued permits in 2010. So the idea behind this database is that you can query these areas that are kind of written off of maps and kind of uncover what used to be there. So this is an image of the White Rock Creek watershed. The area that we're focused on is at the very southern tip. And as you can see, it extends all the way north into Plano and Collin County, which is well outside the city of Dallas limits. Again, this is the map where I was like, this is not a good one. But I was trying to give some context to where White Rock Creek watershed is within the city of Dallas. And then the kind of chloropleth underneath it is just population growth over the past 20 years, or 10 years actually. So almost all of the growth is happening outside of the city of Dallas in this northern area of the region. Again, this is just more detail of that area. So you can see that you can just kind of see how the water would flow from the north into this kind of area. So this is just kind of a demonstration of one of the techniques that can be explored with this database. I want to spend just a couple minutes really quickly, and then I'll wrap up, going over kind of what that database looks like. So it needs a few requirements. It needs to be time series enabled, geospatial. We need to be able to link disparate data sets based on location or on account information. It needs to be portable, so something that can move from machine to machine. I wanted it to be relatively easy to use and free. So what I did was do a SQLite database with a Spatialite add-on. It would be possible to use PostGIS or Postgres, I actually don't know how to say that, PostGRE SQL or whatever that's called, to kind of get this similar functionality. The one advantage of SQLite is that you can have multiple geometry columns on the same table, so you can query points against polygons across tables. And then I did a lot of this in Python, and a lot of the database construction is in Python. I use it as a kind of wrapper for SQL commands. For me, that's just a helpful way to kind of structure complex tasks in SQL. Also, you just have access to the Python data visualization languages. Let me go through this. So these are just some of the steps of what I used to build the data set. So I downloaded the data, built it out, loaded in the data, built the indexes, which you have to do. This is very important if you're ever going to do a database project like this, is to just declare indexes. A lot of I think it's a pretty standard database management approach, but without it, your database will be incredibly slow. And then to use the database, I just fed a lot of connection cursor objects to Python scripts. And then I will show real quick, this is kind of how I have the database laid out. So I have a central parcel information table going back to from 2021 to 1999. And then all of these other tables in green is non-spatial information and orange is spatial information. And you're able to kind of query from one location across another location kind of over time. So I think I am past my time actually, so I'm going to go ahead and just wrap it up there. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I saw that you have a bunch of, well, that it said freedom of request. Like what kind, how often are you request for what kind of data?
Yeah, so the question was about Freedom of Information Act requests, how often and for what kinds of data. So essentially all of this data is FOIA'd. The city usually has open records going back, like on their open data websites, going back a couple years, but I usually send them like each new year, just kind of on a regular schedule, just because like they delete data and like don't keep track of things. So like annually. Yep.
For the purpose of travel.
Yep, that's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.